Today is Saturday, December the 29th, 2018. Hello, and welcome to the Deep State War, a special report for January 2019. In the second part of my special report on the Deep State War, we look at a couple more important charts to consider surrounding the Jupiter square Neptune and Saturn sextile Neptune aspects and what we can look forward to in January. In part one, I pointed out that January is a time of culmination for several big names in the deep state, including Hillary Clinton, James Comey, Robert Mueller, and the USA, while things should look pretty good for President Trump. In this video, I'll discuss two more subjects: George W. Bush, the 43rd president, and the guy in charge at the time of 9/11, and the 9/11 event chart. Both of these charts are reaching a point of culmination as well in January. So January is shaping up to be a major turning point in the deep state war. In summary, a few things could happen. High-ranking members of the deep state face downfall and judgment, which is basically what needs to happen before the complete story on 9/11 can be unraveled. Number two, the official story behind 9/11 begins to fall apart. We start to see cracks in the foundation. And three, a resolution of events related to the Iraq War. So once again, we're probably going to see some new information come up related to the downfall of these high-ranking members, which should in turn eventually lead to the complete deconstruction of the 9/11 story, as well as the excuses for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that should take place over the course of this year, concurrent with the next two passes of Jupiter square Neptune and Saturn sextile Neptune. And that'll be in June and in early fall. So far, we have seen George H.W. Bush die, and many have said he was put to death and was made to look like natural causes, just like John McCain. And after looking at their transits, it seems plausible that the same thing could happen to Hillary Clinton and as well George W. Bush. And just to round out the picture, at the end of the video, a few other charts to give us a little more information. Transits for the Federal Reserve, which is going through a difficult period right now. Trump is calling for the removal of Chairman Powell. And I'll talk about that. As well as transits for Israel, having a big transit in early January. Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, and transits for Iraq. I found a really amazing synchronicity with the Saturn square Neptune aspect and the natal chart for Iraq. And that's something to consider. All right, so let's get started with George W. Bush. You know, early December, right at the time of his father's funeral, he was getting Neptune trine Sun, and that was 13 Pisces to 13 Cancer. A very sensitive moment for him. He was a bit vulnerable, but the trine really pulled him through. And I think it also allowed him to let go of the past a bit and prepare himself for what is about to come. That dissolving energy of Neptune on the Sun is just the start of what's happening for him, because on the 21st of January, Saturn oppositions Sun, so that'll be 13 degrees of Capricorn to 13 degrees of Cancer. And this particular transit is one pass only. So heads up, you know, some of the Saturn transits we're getting around now are going to be just one pass only. It's interesting to note because the energy gets all condensed into just one pass instead of the typical 3 passes. But anyway, it's just like the USA around this time because their birthdays are so close apart. He's born on July the 6th. So very close with the Sun there. And it's a time of low energy and confrontations, limitations from the world, hesitation, and doubt. Now, he feels the weight of the world pressing down on him, and it could be a rather karmic moment for him, because this transit is also a time of culmination for events that began 14 years ago. And that would be back to the late 2003, mid-2004 time, which was not long after the start of the Iraq War and many of the events surrounding the Iraq War. You know, like the National Guard troops were moving over there around that time, and it was just a real intense time, and all of that build up to Iraq and the movement into Iraq started then. So for him, it's particularly karmic. And we could also say that he's going to have confrontation with the new authority. And that's because it's Saturn in the new cycle. So I'm differentiating between Saturn before and the old cycle, kind of referring to it as the old authority, the one that was in place at the time of 9/11, the deep state, basically, as compared to the new authority, which is being run by Trump. So a lot of this stuff is coming up with regards to 14 years ago for Trump and for the USA. And what makes this more interesting is that exactly at the same time of this aspect, we get, this transit, we get the aspect Mars square Saturn. So you'll see, very carefully, look at not only the degree, but the minutes. Mars at 13 degrees, 47 minutes of Aries, Jupiter 1347 of Capricorn, and his Sun is at 1347 of Cancer. So the Mars square Saturn aspect really hits him hard. It's precisely on his Sun, can't get any closer. So clearly that Mars square Saturn aspect is going to manifest through him now. Now that aspect means authority acts with aggression, and that in this case would be the new authority, led by Donald Trump, acts with aggression, and that aggression is pointed toward George W. So that's particularly bad for him, that he's having this Saturn opposition Sun exactly concurrent with the Mars square Saturn aspect. So this is what tells me, it's rather fateful for him at this time. Like he could really face a downfall. Just this alone is very symbolic. And I think it's kind of interesting to note that his North Node will be conjuncting his Saturn. You'll see it there, 26 degrees, 29 minutes of Cancer. So yeah, pretty much that day or the next day, it conjuncts his Saturn. And that transit is actually a time of reward or recognition for your career. But I'm wondering, because the moon's nodes sometimes can be karmic, I'm wondering if the recognition is karmic recognition for what he has done. And around the end of the month, he's going to be having a really difficult time. Something that tells me possibly this is the time when he dies, because of all the quincunxes happening near the end of the month. So I'm going to move to January the 29th, which is just 2 days before the Saturn sextile Neptune. And he's having a few quincunxes around that time, starting with Pluto quincunx Venus, and that'll be 21 degrees of Capricorn to 21 degrees of Leo. Now this can be a challenging aspect. It's somewhat like the square in that it can bring problems in relationships, and as well legal challenges, because Venus rules the 7th house and Libra, which rules legal and court proceedings. So this transit could manifest as a serious legal issue, or possibly even police actions against him, or even violence against him, because that's the nature of Pluto. As well, with the quincunx, it has that Scorpio, Virgo quality to it. So you got to be careful with those Pluto quincunxes. They can be rather dangerous. And these 2 days near the end of the month are the ones that could be, what I'm thinking, fatal for him. Because you'll see here, we've got the Sun conjunct Mercury happening on the 29th. That aspect will be at 9 degrees, 52 minutes of Aquarius. And this aspect will oppose his natal Mercury at 9 degrees of Leo, and quincunx his Mars actually a couple more quincunxes with Sun and Mercury to his Mars at 9 degrees of Virgo. So this one Sun conjunct Mercury aspect forms 6 transits in all, because actually I should have mentioned the Pluto is in there very close at 10 degrees of Leo, and that's only about a half a degree away from this conjunction here. So that's very close as well. So the quincunx to Mars is going to create ego conflicts, fights, again, potentially violence. And the oppositions to Mercury and Pluto are going to create a lot of confrontations. And you can almost throw the ascendant in there at 7 degrees Leo. It's not too far apart. So it's a lot of confrontation. And the Sun conjunct Mercury is a very political aspect because Mercury rules politics. So that's going to be a day when the Sun shines the light of truth, hopefully, onto politics. Basically, it's much more conscious. We're very aware of what's going on politically at that time, and it's rather interesting that once again it forms rather strong transits to his natal chart. So if you kind of follow the energy flow, and I do this sometimes when I'm looking to see how things will manifest, and we start with the quincunx from Pluto, which happens first. So the energy flows from Pluto to Venus, and the energy from that Venus gets is going to be expressed in the 7th house. And that's typical because it's really true with all of the planets. Anytime you get a transit to any planet, the energy of that transit can manifest in the ruling house or sign of that planet. So Venus, it rules the 7th house. So some of that energy from the quincunx goes to the 7th house. From there, I think it gets absorbed by this Sun conjunct Mercury and the aspects that are happening with it. And this energy flow with the oppositions means the energy kind of goes back and forth on his Pluto and his Mercury, you know, trying to defend himself with a lot of passion and fervor. But I think that a bottleneck occurs here at Mars at 9 degrees of Virgo, because that one, the energy doesn't really have anywhere to go. So to me, that says where that buildup occurs, that's where the majority of all of this group of aspects is going to land. And that's a lot of energy directed at his Mars, and I think that that's violent conflict. So my impression of this, and in a way it's a psychic impression, is that they execute him, probably just like his father. So I'm speculating that he goes down with the deep state along with Hillary. And as I mentioned last week, the quincunx is the only aspect in astrology that seems to coincide with death, statistically speaking, you could say. And since he's got 3 within a day, it seems like we should at least consider the possibility without hoping for it. I'm just hoping for justice, really, and closure so that the nation can move on. So that's a really important thing to consider, is what's going on with this guy and the karma that he is swept up in. Okay, so let's move along now to the 9/11 event chart. And this is a pretty amazing synchronicity that we see happening in January for this chart. Now this event chart gives us an indication of the life of the story around 9/11. Because that's really what this thing is at this point. It's just a story. And the real story is currently covered up by an official story, which is just one big lie. And we're never going to get to the real story while the lie remains on top of it. And it's kind of interesting when looking at these planets on the outer ring for September the 11th, 2001. I cast it for 8:20 a.m., right around the time when the planes hit the towers. And if you look at these planets, they kind of represent the people who were in charge at the time. It's almost like the 9/11 event chart becomes an overlay onto the birth charts of the people who are responsible for it. And it was kind of interesting. A couple of years ago, at the Saturn opposition Saturn, when we had Saturn in Sagittarius, it opposed the Saturn here at 14 degrees of Gemini. We were looking for a culmination or a resolution of the event, because that's the classical 14-year Saturn opposition. But what we saw instead at that time was not a resolution of the event, but rather a new authority, we could say transiting Saturn, came into place. And that was Trump, when he started to run for office and became very popular. And he was clearly getting help from those who opposed the deep state. You could call them the white hats. So a new authority came into being around that time. And this was one that opposed the official story as told by the old authority. So you could say they opposed the structure of 9/11. You could oppose, they opposed the validity of 9/11, or you could just say they opposed the people in authority at the time of 9/11. And after 9/11, Trump was quoted as saying he does not believe the official story. He even mentioned explosives had to be involved. So this whole episode of seeing what happened at the Saturn opposition Saturn taught us all something. It taught us that the transits to Saturn in this event chart manifest in the careers of those responsible for 9/11, but not necessarily revelation of the truth regarding 9/11. But we should consider this a time when structural changes were made such that success could be achieved later on, which is exactly what happens at the Saturn opposition. You face that very difficult moment. It forces you to pull back and make structural changes. And the hope is eventually you will succeed. So what happens in January to the 9/11 event chart will bring another pivotal moment in the story of 9/11, a moment which promises to bring accountability to those responsible and likely start the process that eventually leads to a legal challenge to the official version of events. And if there is ever an official revision of the original story, it will take a while before that could happen. First, it would take hearings, before that a call for those hearings, and that would only happen if there was a chance of success. And the only chance of success is to first get rid of those who block that process. And that is what is happening this month. The official story will begin to fall apart this month, and the process should continue throughout this year. And when looking at the transits for this event chart, it's all about Jupiter and Saturn. And I want to approach it this way because I want to give you an idea that what's going on with this event chart is that there's so much stress on Jupiter and Saturn this month that the basic structure of what the 9/11 event is, that story, will be completely changed. Okay, now these two planets, Jupiter and Saturn, they're in a category all their own. They are the social planets. They are what form the finite boundary between a person and the rest of the world. Each of us has a boundary around us in order to individuate ourselves in the environment. The inner planets are your personal qualities, while the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, those define the transpersonal influences that are operating upon you in this life. But the basic finite boundary between you and the rest of the world is defined by Jupiter and Saturn. Now I've got a little bit of a graphic here that I'll share with you. You'll see I put this together here, this boundary, this finite boundary around you has two colors. The inside is Jupiter. That's the part of that boundary that you see as you're looking out into the rest of the world. And Saturn is the outer part of that boundary, which is what the rest of the world sees when it looks at you. And together, these two form that finite boundary around you. So the reason why I go through a little exercise, just emphasize the importance of Jupiter and Saturn and how they, basically form your structure in this world, your ability to individuate yourself. So if you were a person born with this chart, this was your birth chart, born on 9/11, I would say that your entire world, that finite boundary around you, it's about to change so dramatically that your life will not be the same from this month forward. I would say that you simply won't know who you are for a while, at least not until this is over. Because here we see both Jupiter and Saturn going through such a tremendous upheaval concurrently that if you were a person, you would say, I'm really not sure who I am anymore. And the rest of the world would say, we really don't know who you are anymore either. In other words, when you're looking out into the world, your Jupiter is so in a state of turmoil now, upheaval, that you really won't know your perspective anymore. And the world looking at you, the Saturn side, won't understand you either. So considering all that, let's take a look at the transits for the 9/11 chart and discuss what may happen as we go along. We will look at the transits on or around 3 important dates: January 1st, the 13th, and the 31st. Of course, the 13th and the 31st are the dates for Jupiter square Neptune and Saturn sextile Neptune. And actually, we're having Saturn conjunct Sun on the 1st, so that's pretty important. But if you look at the transits for this event chart, we start out with Jupiter quincunx Jupiter. You'll see Jupiter's down there at about 12 degrees of Sagittarius, and Jupiter at natal at 11 degrees of Cancer. So the day before, on the 31st, Jupiter quincunx Jupiter. So Jupiter comes in and makes a precise adjustment to create conflicts between those who promote the official story and those who do not. So those who promote the official story would be represented by Jupiter in the natal chart, and those who do not promote the official story is transiting Jupiter. And the quincunx creates conflict between those two groups of people. Any conflict, and this conflict could bring 9/11 into the news as well. And maybe some new information is released, possibly the result of something that was revealed in judicial proceedings or testimony. Or maybe a new official takes office, and he or she is someone who is known to disagree with the official story, like appointing a 9/11 critic to an official post of some importance, like maybe, I know General Kelly is no longer White House Chief of Staff, and Mattis is out as well. Maybe if they appointed someone who didn't believe in the official story to, say, the Secretary of Defense position to replace Mattis, that would be really amazing, wouldn't it? And this is the kind of precise adjustment you could see when we had the quincunx to Jupiter, the Uranus quincunx Jupiter at the start of the Jupiter cycle. We had that precise adjustment where John Sessions, or Jeff Sessions, was out, and they put Whitaker in. That precise kind of adjustment, an official comes into office. So maybe we'll see something like that. Or it could be the publication of some information that challenges the official story. And it could come from an international source, because Jupiter rules foreigners. So at the Sun conjunct Saturn aspect, which you see will be here at 11 degrees of Capricorn, it opposes the natal Jupiter at 11 degrees Cancer. So we've got Sun and Saturn oppose Jupiter. Now the Sun conjunct Jupiter aspect is the mark of the new Saturn cycle, and maybe just like the executive order at the last pass of Sun conjunct Jupiter on the 21st of December 2017, where we saw that very special and very important executive order being enacted by Trump, maybe we'll see another one like that, something that reopens the 9/11 event to a new review. And I have heard from one source that the executive order from 2017 does not take full effect until January the 1st, 2019. But I haven't been able to confirm that. But nonetheless, it seems really clear that this Sun conjunct Saturn represents Saturn in its new cycle. It's a very important aspect from that perspective. And maybe we could, and this happening right on the opposition to Jupiter tells me that it's very symbolic. Like whatever executive actions take place right now are meant directly to address the issue of 9/11. The Saturn opposition Jupiter, in this case, I would interpret this in terms of the groups of people represented by the planets. So the new authority confronts those who promote the official story. This also brings a review of the new growth that began 14 years ago. So this would be when Saturn conjuncted Jupiter in the event chart. So again, we have another 14-year review, things that began 14 years ago. So that would be the Iraq War. In this case, the Iraq War was an expression of this chart because it was the growth of the fascist movement that started with this chart. So that Saturn conjunct Jupiter was coincidental with the start of the Iraq War, and now we get the Saturn opposition Jupiter, and that's going to bring a review, yet another indication of a review of the Iraq War, just like with George W. and the USA. And this transit may take the form of some new hard reality. You know, Saturn, has the facts down, master of the physical realm. So some new hard reality, like an executive order, basically that stops those who promote the official story from moving forward. So promoters of the story are forced to backtrack, they lose confidence, they appear weak, and this would be the mainstream press. They're vulnerable and unable to deal with the situation, so they lose credibility. And if the information is significant enough, it will cause many people to abandon official sources. So those who promote the official story, Jupiter, they begin to abandon it. And for sure, these two oppositions together indicate a lot of powerful confrontations with relation to the story. And it's only going to get more powerful because just a few days later, on the 4th of January, Jupiter at 12 degrees of Sagittarius is going to conjunct the Pluto in the natal chart of the 9/11 event. So, what happens there? First of all, we should note that this chart has got a Jupiter quincunx Pluto in it. And that's pretty important to note. You know, Pluto, war and destruction, was thrust into the news, Jupiter. And the news organizations had to make a precise adjustment to their regular programming, didn't they? And that's what happens with the quincunx. Suddenly you get swept along by forces outside of yourself. Swept along by the ambitions of others, usually. And as for this transit, the Jupiter conjunct Pluto, those who seek justice sense an opportunity, because, this is a very ambitious transit. So someone sees an opportunity to make headway and gain and power over those responsible for 9/11 and make a bold move. This could manifest as judicial or police actions, or it could be the release of new information. Once again, Jupiter loves to publish. It's something that might start the process towards another review. It could signify a legal battle against those who are responsible for 9/11. That could be the case as well. And basically, the 9/11 story rides a wave of collective energy. It could be very fruitful, or fortunate, I should say, for those who seek justice, because it's a very lucky transit. And if you're using that Pluto energy for the good of the collective, you get a lot of blessings from the universe here, and a lot of power. So, if those who are trying to bring justice need a helping hand, this one is really a good one. So these are the transits on or around the 1st. And when we move to transits on or around the 13th, the time of the Jupiter square Neptune aspect, the one that's supposed to really expand our consciousness, we see that just a couple of days later, on the 15th, Jupiter opposition Saturn. So we've got Saturn opposition Jupiter and Jupiter opposition Saturn. Wow, 14 Sag to 14 Gemini. So, once again, we look at the groups of people involved, and what these planets represent is those groups. So judicial actions against those responsible for 9/11, who appear weak and unprepared for this moment. Once again, new information, maybe from international sources, brings a lack of confidence in the official story. Okay, so that finite boundary around the individual that is 9/11 is now going through absolute upheaval at this point. Because, Saturn and Jupiter, they're basically opposing forces. Jupiter expands, Saturn contracts, so both of those natal planets are getting their opposite force. And that's why this individual's finite boundary is being shattered this month. Conflicting forces cause the official story to weaken and lose credibility. Doesn't know who it is anymore, and we don't know who it is anymore. It results in some folks, they continue to support the official story because they need to, and they put renewed energy into that. They get really pumped up about it, really emphatic, while a whole new set of people who once believed the official story now change their minds. So with these planets opposing one another concurrently, we get a lot of polarization into two different camps, and that's going to cause a lot of confrontations and conflicts. And as we move ahead to the end of the month, January the 31st, around the time of the Saturn sextile Neptune aspect, it gets even more intense, because on the 26th, Neptune squares Saturn, 14 Pisces to 14 Gemini. So once again, Saturn represents the chart of those responsible. So this transit promises to dissolve the structure of 9/11 by dissolving the careers of the people involved. They've become confused and isolated, as Neptune does, over the course of this transit. I mean, it's been going on since March 2018, and we've already seen what's happened. We've seen their network dismantled as they are being eliminated one by one. And this is the last pass, the point of culmination in the dissolving of the structure, the dissolving of the careers of those responsible. And we can add to that the Saturn quincunx Saturn. So once again, it's new authority Saturn versus old authority Saturn. So new authority figures like Trump seize the opportunity, that quincunx. You really want to seize the day with it. They seize the opportunity to deal a death blow, judgment, and karma to those responsible. And I basically interpret this as a battle between the new authority and the old authority. Saturn versus Saturn, you could say. So in summary, it looks like the deep state suffers a major defeat in January. Issues related to a variety of things, especially this 9/11 chart, as well the Iraq war, because it's constantly coming up as something that's going to be reviewed now. And we all know what's happening with the Russia collusion scam. All these things are going to reach a point of culmination as members of the deep state face fateful transits, especially Hillary and George W. Concerning the 9/11 official story, I repeat myself here a little bit. It's going to take a little time for the complete reversal. We need to get rid of those responsible first. But I think it will happen over the course of this year. And got a few more charts I want to go over, starting with the Federal Reserve. On November the 28th, they got the last pass of Pluto opposition Mars. It brought some sort of conclusion regarding the power struggle at the Feds, and it seems the Chinese or just basically foreign powers have taken over. And they don't really seem to have the power they once did. And maybe they lost their power to the foreign banks. You don't really hear much about it, in the mainstream press or even the alternative press. They're very, very closed in that way. They don't want anyone to realize it's just a big Ponzi scheme. But clearly they've gone through some very difficult periods lately with the Pluto opposition, ascendant, and Mars. And at the end of December, actually on Christmas Day, you got Neptune squaring Mercury, the last pass. And that was 13 degrees of Pisces to 13 degrees of Sagittarius. And about that time, Trump was discussing firing Chairman Powell, openly criticizing the Fed earlier in the month, too. And Neptune brings doubt, and it shows weakness and humiliation. This square to Neptune, as well as the square to Saturn, which is very close, because they're 13 degrees of Gemini. So that one was over a little while ago. But basically, this Neptune squaring the Mercury opposition Saturn over the last year or so, it's brought a lot of confusion to the Fed. And now that these transits are over, more clarity should come soon. The fact that Powell was brought on during this confusing time, which is now coming to an end, I would think is justification in and of itself to get rid of him now at the last pass. And maybe we'll see some aggressive behavior around the 1st when Mars conjuncts their midheaven at 0 degrees of Aries. But the transits around the 13th, the time of the Jupiter square Neptune aspect, just like so many people, is it oppositions to Jupiter and Saturn. On the 8th, they get Jupiter opposition Saturn, so they're not sure if they should expand or contract. It's a really bad time to make decisions. They want to make a move because, Jupiter wants to expand and says, I want to do something, but they're uncertain, they're conflicted. But running away from the facts of reality, and that leads to hasty decisions. They're unsure of the long-term implications of what they're doing, and it makes for poor judgment if they're not careful. And basically, I think they need to be wary of showing a lack of self-confidence. It could have a detrimental effect on the markets and make the situation ripe for Trump to fire Powell and really show that he's in charge. And then Jupiter conjunct Mercury on the 9th. So that, again, will be down there at 13 degrees of Sagittarius. And I'm thinking that Jupiter could bring some major announcement by Trump regarding his decisions on Powell. Maybe the announcement of a new chairman, or basically just the announcement of some actions by Trump, because this is Jupiter in its new cycle. So this is part of the new authority that's coming in, I would say. Some actions by Trump to basically tell the Fed, we're taking over and we're in charge now. And that's the general theme of what I see with regards to the transits to the Fed. With respect to this war they're having with Trump right now, it looks to me like Trump is going to really show them what's going on. He's going to take over. And we've got the Saturn quincunx Saturn. So again, there's a conflict between new authority and them. So the new authority makes a precise adjustment to their structure, which enables them to move forward. And this could indicate a change of leadership, this kind of aspect especially. So again, it doesn't really look good for Chairman Powell. And then on the 17th, Neptune trine Moon. So Neptune at 14 degrees of Pisces, trining their Moon at 14 degrees of Scorpio. Now this transit will make them hypersensitive to really whatever happens now, but just generally very sensitive and worried because they just feel more vulnerable. Nonetheless, the trine ensures movement of energy. Therefore, some resolution is going to happen here naturally without effort. Okay, so for a person, this is a really wonderful transit. It's very idealistic. Brings lots of healing energy, a desire to protect and nurture everyone around you. But this could translate as, maybe some new idealistic feelings surrounding a new appointment, and the feeling that they've been saved from a disaster. And that's because it's this Scorpio to Pisces, this real resolution that comes. In this case, Scorpio can be kind of dark elements are resolved. Maybe some underlying insecurity, that's the moon, could be resolved by this Neptune in Pisces. I'm speculating a bit wildly here. Maybe their involvement in some illegal scheme from the past is resolved kind of all by itself. The trine allows the energy to move. And like maybe their involvement in 9/11 from the financial end of it, maybe they're going to be relieved of that burden. We won't hear about it in the mainstream news, but that's what this tells me could happen, because it's in Scorpio. And because Neptune represents the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, I think this could actually have a positive effect on gold markets. And then at the end of the month, near the Saturn sextile Neptune, they're going to be getting Saturn sextile that same moon in Scorpio. Very nice. It's a good transit that brings a general sense of stability and well-being. Things move along slow but sure. Like the Neptune transit, it also enables healing and resolution of insecurities. It's very therapeutic. It's from their 6th house. Saturn transiting their 6th house, which is a time when you really need to attend to your health regime. So this is a time when really, the sextile to the moon in the 4th, they should get themselves more healthy. So the overall picture for the Fed in January is likely a change at the top, a big announcement, basically Trump getting his way, and a release of some burden from the past, which may never be fully disclosed in the mainstream press, but probably something to do with the financial end of 9/11. And I think the Fed is going to get healthy at the end of the month as a result of all this, and gold is probably going to go up for all those people interested in buying gold. I think it's going to go up in mid-January. Okay, moving along to Israel. Taking a look at Israel, not because they're caught up in the two major aspects, but one rather interesting transit for them in January that may put them in the news, and I thought it would be a good idea to include them in the mix. You'll see here transits for Israel on January the 8th. Uranus goes stationary direct at 28 degrees 37 minutes of Aries. Well, that's an exact square to their midheaven at 28 degrees 37 of Cancer. So this transit is for an extended period of time, about 1 week before and after. And it could produce a sudden change for Israel. It's a bolt of rebellious energy. Now, in extreme cases, you throw aside everything that you have worked for and follow some ideal, especially if you've been really restricted in the past. This really, depends on how much you've denied your own individuality. But hidden tensions from relations with others, because it's in the 7th house, suddenly erupt and cause a crisis and a break from the past. This could mean a sudden change of leadership and consequently a new direction for the nation, because the midheaven is your direction and Uranus rules change. So we're looking at a sudden change to their direction. And that could come from a release from restrictions placed on them, maybe because due to the fact that their leader, Netanyahu, was one of the architects of 9/11. And then that's on the 8th, and then shortly thereafter on the 11th, Saturn quincunx Pluto. So that'll be 12 Capricorn to 12 Leo. And this could mean a change at the top. Just like Saturn quincunx Saturn, that can mean the same thing. The same with the quincunx of Pluto. It brings a sudden limitation as well. They're feeling kind of isolated, like resources are limited. Authority placed in a threatening position. Netanyahu is already facing criminal investigation. He may be forced to defend himself from police actions. So looking at the chart of Israel, it doesn't look too good for Netanyahu. So interesting transits show that Israel could be changing leadership this month. So I thought, well, maybe I'll take a look at Netanyahu's transits. We've got his birth chart here and the correct time. So he's not getting any major transits at the same time as Israel. In fact, his transits up until the end of January look really good. But in February, things get rather challenging for him. Transits on or around the 13th. He's having a Jupiter square Saturn, which is really not a major upsetting transit, although it's another one of those Jupiter-Saturn tough connections. You know, it's one of those ones where you need to put aside things that aren't working, make some adjustments, and in this way you secure your path in life. But it's not a particularly difficult one, and he's gotten a really good transit on the 1st, Jupiter trine Pluto. And that's an exceptionally good transit, and things basically go his way. But then as soon as we get into the first week of February, things kind of change. Saturn trines his Saturn and squares his Neptune. So you'll see here he's got natal Saturn at 15 degrees of Virgo and Neptune at 15 degrees of Libra, so there's like a semi-sextile. He gets a square to one and a trine to the other. Now the Saturn trine Saturn is pretty nice, but the Saturn square Neptune, that one is difficult, and it's one of the same transits that Hillary's getting, and it brings a time of isolation, uncertainty, and disappointment. His connection to the collective is restricted, and his career is dissolving. His career goals seem meaningless now. So that's one indication that his career seems to be going away right now. And the second one is another hard Saturn-Neptune connection. This one is Neptune opposition Saturn, and that'll be on the 12th. So that'll be at when Neptune's at 15 Pisces to 15 Virgo. So another one of these hard Saturn-Neptune transits. Neptune dissolves his career. It's been a rather challenging transit that he's been going through since April of this year, and he's had a lot of tough challenges to his position during this time, including, like I mentioned, that criminal investigation. So we see a culmination of that activity. And then at the end of April, Neptune quincunx Neptune, and this is most certainly a time of endings. So it looks like a sudden change of direction for Israel in the beginning of January. While Netanyahu may withstand that, based on the transit, it doesn't look too good for him in early February. He may not make it to the next elections coming up in April, as the mood of the nation will change rather dramatically and suddenly in January. Okay, I wanted to leave off with Iraq, because they are someone I've mentioned a lot of during this report. A lot of indicators tell us that this is going to be a time of review and reconsideration with regards to, things like the WMDs, that excuse that got us into the war. And I just wanted to start off by saying that that WMD excuse, it came at a time of Jupiter opposition Neptune, and that was in February 2003, which coincided with those huge anti-war demonstrations, the biggest in history. And that whole MWD excuse, weapons of mass destruction, presents us with a classic Jupiter-Neptune argument, an argument between perceptions and faith. Jupiter says, I only believe what I can see, and those folks that were in the sort of the Jupiter side of the opposition, they were in the anti-war group. They said, we don't believe this, we don't see it, so we don't believe it. But Neptune, has faith, so they don't need to see in order to believe. So they were the ones who took the side of the president, I guess, at the time, and said, we believe you, we'll go along with you. So that was the Jupiter opposition Neptune. So now we're at the Jupiter square Neptune. And it only seems right that we should be reviewing that information, at this square. expanding our awareness of that event, especially now since it's the first Jupiter square Neptune in their ruling signs since 2001. So hopefully this time, seeing it for what it is, a false justification for war. And I've mentioned Iraq numerous times in this report. Like I said, several indicators, including transits for the USA, transits for Bush, transits for 9/11, the event chart, as well as this Jupiter square Neptune aspect. They all indicate some potential for resolution of those events. So, I thought I'd check their transits, see what the nation of Iraq is going through around this time. And what I came up with was a really amazing synchronicity. On the 31st of January, we are getting the aspect Saturn sextile Neptune. And that will be at 14 degrees, 55 minutes of Capricorn to 14 degrees, 55 minutes of Pisces. And this sextile will form the base of a yod pointing precisely to their Mercury at 14 degrees, 55 minutes of Leo. And with their ascendant close by at 14 degrees, 40 minutes of Leo, it too is caught up in the yod. With respect to the Mercury, it can't get any closer. It's perfect. So they're getting Saturn quincunx Mercury and Neptune quincunx Mercury. And for sure, that aspect affects them, this Saturn sextile Neptune, affects them more than anyone else I've mentioned in this report so far. We're always looking to see who is going to manifest these aspects for us. And clearly, Iraq is going to manifest the Saturn sextile Neptune more than anyone in this report. And all this stuff that I've just mentioned about Neptune and beliefs, and how this Jupiter square Neptune that we're getting is a reconsideration of what happened at the Jupiter opposition Neptune back in 2003 when we decided to go to war with Iraq. Well, now we also have Saturn sextile Neptune thrown into the mix, which changes the quality of the moment quite a bit. Saturn is the opposite of Jupiter. Saturn is realistic. So it's going to give us a realistic reappraisal of our beliefs, as well as an opportunity to restructure our beliefs. As well, Saturn digs down a little bit in order to put in a foundation. So Saturn always unearths something from the past when it comes in and does its work. In this case, the entire world, not just the USA, but the entire world is going to get an opportunity to revisit the reasons for the Iraq war and make a precise adjustment to their thinking. Not just for Iraq. In a sense, this Mercury becomes part of a collective experience, one in which we are all caught up in. It affects them directly, but we're all caught up in this aspect. And that's where that energy is going for this quincunx, and it affects so many people, especially like Hillary Clinton, who's got planets around here. So basically what I'm saying is, in order for this to happen, in order for all of the things that I've been talking about to happen, there must be some major disclosure of the real reasons the U.S. went to war in Iraq. This implies all of the things that I've been saying in this entire two-part report. All of those things must happen in order for this precise adjustment here to happen. So it implies this revisiting of the Iraq war, which implies a revisiting of 9/11, which implies all of those things with regards to those responsible for 9/11 facing justice. This really is the absolute perfect ending, you would say, to the whole drama, swept up in a collective moment. A precise adjustment comes to resurrect Iraq's identity, it's their ascendant, and their voice, Mercury, as a nation. So this to me is, why I left it for last. It really shows what it's all leading to at the end of the month in January. Okay, so there it is. The most amazing synchronicity of all. I saved it for last. Well, that's all I have to say about part 2 of the Deep State War, this special report for January 2019. I am very much looking forward to the events in January and the end of the Deep State. So I would say that I'm a little emotionally involved in this, but I'm trying to maintain my neutrality. A huge burden is going to be lifted from the nation and from the president. And most of all, the revelations regarding 9/11 and the Iraq War will come, I think, more completely this year, as those responsible are first removed from power. So once again, thanks for viewing. Please hit the subscribe button. I really need to get my subscriber numbers over 1,000 in order to take my channel to the next level. And please hit the like button as well. It really helps because YouTube is throttling my channel. They're not reporting most of my viewers. And this is just to give you a little example here. This is the analytics page, and you're looking at demographics for my channel. And you'll see here, this is April of 2018, the 1st until the 30th. So that's the month of April. And you'll see here, they're listing 100% of my viewers as female between the ages of 55 and 64. So they're basically not including everyone else in all of the other categories. And if I try to even get more recent statistics, like the next month of May 2018, we could see that it comes up, well, no activity for this range. Well, that's just crazy. I mean, we all know there is. And it's that way for the rest of the year. Basically, they stopped giving me statistics in May. Before that, they were throttling it for about a year. So it's this real big problem I have trying to get myself out there while YouTube is clearly not reporting everything properly. So if you go to the searches on YouTube for astrology forecasts, I don't even come up. Hundreds and hundreds of videos before me, many channels with even fewer subscribers than I do, they come up, but mine doesn't. So it's kind of disappointing. Although I should say my weblog is doing really well these days. I've been getting a lot more shares lately. So thanks to those who are helping me by sharing this video with their friends. So that's why I kind of asked a special request to please like the video to see, what it really turns out to be. So anyway, just to let you know, I am a practicing astrologer. And if you're interested in getting a reading from me, please contact me at mobilestar7@yahoo.com or through my weblog or my website, and I will leave links in the description. Lately, I've been doing a lot of these 1-hour phone consultations for $35, or even half-hour for $25. Been getting a lot of interest with that lately, so just to let you know, it's an ongoing thing, and I can work with Skype. Okay, so that's all for this report. Once again, thanks for viewing. Many blessings, and be good to yourself. Oh, and Happy New Year.